Good afternoon. Let me take this opportunity to thank everybody for coming today. It's a little rainy out there now, but it's going to clear up by the time you guys are ready to leave. That's the good news. Our last presenter, James Curley, is a National Strength and Conditioning Association certified both as a strength conditioning specialist and a personal trainer. He's specializing as a strength coach and a TRX suspension trainer. Currently, he's a teacher at the Grayman School and Glenview Academy in Fairfield, New Jersey, where he teaches children with autism. He is the founder, inventor, and U.S. patent holder of TigerMat, a fitness equipment and education company, as well as the author, lead instructor, and approved continuing education provider for NSCA, NASM, AFA, ACE, and CanFit Pro. Today, his presentation, Your Brain on Suspension Exercise, is going to focus on how to utilize an innovative training method to improve balance and coordination. Without further ado, James Curley.
Hello, everybody. One second. Mic here. All right. Thank you, Neil. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you for having me here, guys. From the planning committee, Golly and Neil. Really appreciate it. So once again, my name is James Curley, and my presentation has to do with your brain on suspension exercises, utilizing an innovative training method to improve balance and coordination. So a little bit more about me. I'm a certified strength and conditioning specialist and a certified personal trainer at the NSCA. And I took the TRX suspension training course both back in 2011 and 12. I spent 5 years as a trainer as well as a strength and conditioning coach. And I have 3 teaching certifications out of New Jersey. And for the last 5 years, as Neil said, I've been working with children with autism. So the outline for the presentation today is we're going to do a brief overview of what suspension exercises are, mainly the factors of intensity and what the scientific literature says about suspension exercises in general. And then we're going to look at a couple of studies that have to do with how suspension exercises affect balance, and looking at the results of tests, both subjective and objective. And then we're going to see how do we increase instability during these particular exercises. And then finally, we'll go over the recommended methods of how to measure and track balance and stability in practical settings with everyday equipment and in an everyday setting. So first, a question. Most of your students here, some of you are in the field. How many of you utilize suspension exercises with a TRX trainer or other equipment as part of your workouts or with your clients? All right, we got 3 or 4 in the room. Okay, well, even though there's a few people raising their hand right now, TRX is actually incredibly popular. If you see those yellow and black straps in the gym, you've seen a TRX trainer, which is pretty much in any major gym franchise. And it's been becoming really popular in the last 2 years in-home, because you can latch it to a door, you can put it on a beam in your garage, etc. And they are seen practically everywhere. Now, what is suspension exercise? There's basically 4 factors that determine the intensity of a suspension exercise. The first 2 I call constants, meaning that they don't change from one set to the next for a particular exercise. First is the height of the anchor. And that's typically where you hang it up, whether it's on the door, or it's on a beam, or a pull-up bar, an A-frame, etc. Now, from one workout to the next, if you go to the same area and use the same spot, the height of the anchor is not going to change. But it will change if you move from one spot to another. Now, for the strap length, most pieces of equipment that have to do with suspension exercise, you can change the length. You can make it longer, make it shorter, etc. But each exercise that is used by practitioner suspension exercises use a specific length for a particular exercise. It's usually prescribed either through TRX and their manuals. So if you're doing a press where the anchor is behind you and you're leaning forward, typically the straps are at full length. And if you're doing a row while still standing and facing the anchor, usually you shorten it up. But those lengths stay the same for that particular exercise. So these 2 factors really don't change from workout to workout. But these 2 factors do. So one is the body lean, or the angle of the body during an exercise. Going from standing at 90 degrees, the smaller the degree is, going towards the floor, the harder the exercise is going to be for any exercise where your hands are in the handles. as you see from the easier version versus the harder version. And a great study by this is Melrose and Dawes 2015, who looked at different angles that the body was at, and the closer the angle was to the floor, the higher the intensity. And for the location of the center of gravity or the center of mass, essentially, the further away your center of mass is from where the anchor is hanging from, the harder the exercise is going to be. And the closer you are to the anchor, the easier it is. So they're popular, and we know the factors that have to do with suspension exercise. But are they effective? Now, in a great systematic review by Aguilar-Castiles in 2020, it concluded that a suspension device increased activation in most of the muscle groups participating in suspension exercises compared to traditional equipment or methods, including the core, the pectoralis major, and hamstrings. And the only time that one was equal to the other, as far as traditional equipment and suspension exercise, was an activation of the latissimus dorsi in the middle trapezius for the suspended row versus the inverted row. And another major publicized study by Smith 2016 from this issue of Certified, they investigated acute and chronic responses to suspension exercises and found that it improves muscular fitness and positively modifies several cardiovascular disease risk factors. So the reason why I'm here today and the reason why you guys are here today is, do suspension exercises affect balance? And are there any studies that bring suggestions on whether or not that is the case? So in order to do that, I had to take a journey from summer into the fall of finding these types of studies. So I went mainly to researchgate.net, not .com, .net, and primarily through there, looking for any studies that have to do with, let's say the words TRX, suspension exercises, suspension training, sling, which can be a generic term for either for a TRX suspension trainer or for red cord or other types of equipment like that, and other things that have to do with balance, for a total of over 140 studies, which is quite a bit. And then from there, I narrowed it down to how many studies actually talk about using exclusively suspension exercises and how they affect balance through subjective or objective tools or assessments. And these are, the last one is also from 2021, but here are the 7 that I found that have to do with both. And then from there, I will it down to 3, which not only do I have to talk about suspension exercises and whether or not they affect balance, but also showing what exercises were actually used, so we know what exercise may have affected the balance, and was there a, did they describe in any way how they increase the intensity of the exercise, either through balance or just general change of the body angle or the center of gravity. And these are the 3 that we're going to talk about briefly today. So for the first one, you have Shavrik Lowe, 2019, and he did a study on male futsal players, which is basically indoor soccer, with the age range of 18 to 28. And it was a group of an intervention group using suspension exercises and a control group, which were doing practice, I believe, off-season training. And with the intervention group, they would do the suspension exercise piece, and then they would go on with the rest of the group to do their futsal specialty and tactical training from there. And the exercise program was mainly lower body and core exercises for a total of 6 weeks, 3 times a week. And the exercise progression, the intensity progression was increasing either sets and or reps over those 6 weeks. And they used and this is the total score for the functional movement screening test. And this is the total. So it went from 13.5 prior to the study being done to 16.6 with a p-value of 0.01. All right. And I'm going to go to the next slide, and that is all the scores for all the different tests in case you want to take a picture and take a look at it. I'll only hold there for 5 seconds, though. You want to take a quick picture and then delve into it yourself. And moving on. The second study was Demurier 2021. He used basketball players that were playing in season. And the average age for them was 13 years old, and each player had at least 3 years of experience playing in that basketball league. And it was suspension training group, and there was a control group. And the only real difference is the suspension training group did the training as well as the basketball, where the control group just did the basketball practices. And they used a suspension exercise that hit all the major muscle groups. So they did the suspended press, the suspended row, and all the major muscle groups. So it's the whole body workout routine 3 times a week for 8 weeks. In the intensity progression, if we go back to one of the other slides had to do with body angle, it was at 60 degrees for the first 4 weeks, then 50 degrees for the last 4. And then they did an iso squat for the first 4 weeks for the legs. They did a triangle squat. And then from a plank to doing a bicycle kick, which looks like a suspended mountain climber. So they increased intensity just by either changing the angle or changing the exercise, something more intense, from 1 month to the next. And they used 3 different tests. One, they used the STAR excursion balance test, which I'll show in a moment. And they also did a vertical jump test and a T agility drill test. So there's a lot of information, but to describe it briefly and take a picture of it if you need to. Obviously, this is from each direction of the 8 directions for each leg. Left leg means they were standing on the left leg. Right leg means they were standing on that right leg. Now, for each of the directions, you have the name of the direction, oriented by the left leg. And then the percentage points increase or decrease, which all of them increase for the suspension training group. And then you have the effect size underneath. And anything that is bold and underlined, the p-value was under 0.01. And it was just bold, it was just under 0.05. I'd like to note also this was during the in-season. So the control group who just did the basketball practice, 14, you can't see it here because it's blocked by the screen, but 14 of the 16 directions, their variables decreased from pre to post. But with suspension training group, as you can see, all of them are pluses as an end result. This is in season. And for the last 2 tests for this particular study, the vertical jump for the control group, they increased 2 centimeters, and the suspension training group increased 4 centimeters. And for the T agility drill, the control group lost or gained almost a full half second in their drill over that 8-week period, where the suspension training group decreased that diminishing times in half. So this is really important. They would continue to do suspension training exercises throughout an entire year and entire tournament, then they would be at an advantage versus the group that didn't do this type of intervention. And for the final study, you have SAR 2020, and he worked with female patients with knee osteoarthritis. And the age range was 56 to 64. And there was actually 3 different groups. There was the suspension training group. There was the aquatic group, which did walking underwater, running underwater, stretching, and things of that nature. So there wasn't any swimming involved. And you had the control group that just took their daily drug regimens. And for the exercise programming, the suspension exercises were mainly focused on the core, hip abductors, and leg muscles for a period of 8 weeks, 3 times a week. And the intensity progression was they increased the intensity by 1 or more of these things at a time, which was narrowing their base of support, so bringing their feet together or hands closer together, changing the body angle, as we talked about before, taking their arms off the ground when they're in the supine position, so lying on their back, or they added a weight. Now, in the translation, it wasn't specific on what the weight was, whether it was a vest or a dumbbell, but generally, I think because of the exercise, it was probably adding a dumbbell for something that had to do with one arm being free for a particular exercise. Now, for this study, there were 6 different tests, and all the results are fairly positive. So you have the visual analog scale, you have the Berg balance scale. They had a questionnaire called the Felsen questionnaire, the Walmack, the inclinometer, and the dynamometer. Now, the first 3 tests, you saw improvements, either in pain, balance, or self-reported knee instability for both aquatic and suspension training exercises. And for the last 3, it was only suspension training exercises that saw a significant improvement in those particular tests. And you have the pre and post for suspension training exercise group, and you have the p-values for that group. All right, so when trying to describe within their own papers, the researchers were delving into why it was that these suspension exercises improved balance during their studies. So Shevik Lowe, 2019, said that the suspension exercise provided the opportunity to enhance the activity of the roots of the nerves, to establish coordination between the trunk and the hip joint, and to reduce abnormalities or asymmetry and asymmetry in the limb during the execution of the movement to be. Demerer, 2021, stated that the compound TRX strength trainings performed on unstable conditions, meaning using the suspension trainer itself, causes more motor units to work and to keep stabilization, activates synergist muscle groups more effectively. Thus, they have positive effects on the parameters. And Asar, 2020, stated that body weight and the TRX sling provided an appropriate resistance to strengthen the core as well as the extremities for the KOA patients. And combined two other studies, he continues by saying that with these two studies from Azari and Lyon, suggest that improvements in the extremities were influenced by lobopelvic hip muscular strengthening in the TRX exercises. So the summary of the findings from these three studies, it suggests that there are improvements from balance and stability across different age groups, that there are improvements on post-test of multiple objective and subjective assessments, that there are improvements occurred in season with whole body workouts and with core and lower body workouts. And when you combine it with all the other studies that we talked about at the beginning, it suggests that there's increase in muscular activation, positively modifies the cardiovascular disease risk factors, and improves balance without being balance specific. So there were no Bosu balls being used, there weren't half rollers they had to step on, or anything of that sort. They were on the flat ground as far as I could see in each of the exercises they did. So there wasn't any other special equipment other than the TRX being used for those interventions. So now the question is, how do you measure and track the improvements in balance when utilizing suspension exercises with your clients in a practical way? Anyone want to take a guess? Yes. Okay, so put them in a position where they're on one foot, doing a tree pose. Okay, see if they sway more. So use that as basically a test. So like, okay, this is week 1, week 10, you can do a tree pose and see how much better that you are at keeping stabilized. That's one way. Any others? No, that's okay. That's okay. That's what I'm here for. So first, in addition to what you said, what we also need to consider is how do we even measure and track the intensity of any suspension exercise at all without using a load cell or any other piece of equipment that needs to be attached at one point or another on those straps? And the answer is distance, measuring simple distance. So as I said before, with the two factors that we have control of at any given time, you have the body angle and you have the location of the center of gravity. Now, what I mean by distance is that we can measure where the feet are in relation to the anchor point, or where the hips are in relation to the anchor point. And there are studies that have done this in the past. So we have precedent for using these things to determine intensity of exercise. So these are the main studies for doing that. So you have Genevois and 2014 and Golette, Rogalski 2016, and each of them use standing suspended exercises where they're facing the anchor point and they use scapular retraction as well as external rotations. And they use increments of 10 centimeters for each increment as they're getting closer and closer to the anchor point to increase the intensity of the exercise. And they found positive results in both of those studies. So they started at 95 centimeters and then they moved on to 85, 75, etc. And then you have Aguilar in a separate study from 2019 when he did a suspended lunge. And the suspended lunge in this context was they're facing away from the anchor point, the foot was in the handles, and they did essentially a back lunge. And they found greater intensity when the heel was 80 centimeters away from the anchor point as opposed to 60 centimeters away. So when doing that exercise, the further away you get from the anchor point, the harder the exercise is. And they were using distance to provide that. And then you have the trio of Gadke and Moret 2015, 2016, and Moret et al. 2019, who use zones of difficulty to indicate lower and higher intensities for a variety of suspended exercises based totally on distance and where the straps are hanging from. And then you have Rojas Valverde 2020, who remarked at the end of his paper, it is recommended to mark the distance from where the straps are hanging from for future exercise and programming use. So we have precedent for just measuring the distance. Now, for the remainder of this, we're going to be talking about reference points, which is essentially whatever is on the ground, whatever's touching the ground during the exercise for a suspended exercise, and can be used to measure the distance from the anchor in order to determine the intensity or difficulty of that exercise. So, if I was doing a standing suspended exercise, can anyone tell me what possibly would be my reference point? What body part could I use that's touching the ground and I can use to measure the distance between that and the anchor point? Yes? The foot. Good, awesome. You would use the feet. Good job. So for a standing exercise, it's typically the feet. And basically, the closer your feet are to the anchor point, the angle of the body is going to change and go towards the floor. Since you can't change the strap length and you can't change the height of the anchor, moving the feet is the only way to do it. And therefore, you increase the intensity as you move towards the anchor, and you decrease it as you move away. Now, for a prone exercise where you're in a push-up position, what would be the reference point for that? Yes? Oh, I thought you raised your hand. Did you raise your hand? No? Okay. If I'm in a push-up position with my feet in the straps, what do you think? Your hands. Good job. Yes. It would be your hands. You can use the hands, and you can measure that from where the straps are hanging from, and wherever that distance is, you record it, and then use it for later to either decrease or increase the number, which would increase or decrease the intensity. And then for supine exercises, you would typically use the shoulders, because they're the only thing that can reliably be on the ground for each supine exercise. And in both cases, the further away you are from the anchor, the more intense the exercise. And now off to going back to our original question of, so how do we determine the intensity of, or the instability of a suspended exercise, and whether or not people are progressing in those exercises? Hall 2012 essentially stated that the wider the base of support is, the more stable you are, which obviously is no surprise, right? But McCurdy, 2010, delved a little deeper into this topic by saying, in comparison to a two-legged squat, a single-legged squat has a reduced mediolateral base of support that may demand higher neuromuscular activity to support the body in the frontal plane, which provides a greater level of intensity for the participant. And in the third study that we talked about, that we delved into, ASAR 2020, as we mentioned before, two of the ways that they increased intensity of the exercise wasn't by distance, but was just by narrowing the base of support and taking the arms off the ground when in the supine position. So we've already seen a study where there is a precedent for decreasing the base of support to increase intensity. And this is a graphic, a graphic organizer representation of narrowing your base of support from one picture to the next and increasing the level of instability. So it comes as no surprise that my feet are the widest in the first picture, wider than shoulder width. The second picture, my feet are underneath my hips. The third picture, my feet are together. And the fourth picture, my feet, one foot is off the ground. So it's increasing in the amount of instability my body has to account for the exercise without even moving my feet forwards or backwards. Now for a prone exercise, it's very much the same. My hands are wide, then my hands are on the underneath the shoulders, and then I'm in the diamond position, narrowing my base of support while increasing my instability. Now, can someone suggest how we would decrease the base of support for a supine exercise while I'm lying on my back? What do you think? Yes? Lifting the arm, because in the supine exercise, the heels are already in the straps. So the feet will already be. You can do a single leg bridge. We weren't going to get to that kind of difficulty today. That might be an advanced lecture that I'll do later on this year, but thank you for the idea. Appreciate it. So as the young lady in the back suggested, part of it can be just lifting the arms, like in that study. So this is with my hips, my arms, and my shoulders on the ground. So this is the most stable I can be at the beginning of each rep of the exercise. Then take my feet off the ground with my arms and shoulders still on the ground. I am increasing my instability. Third picture is just my upper arms and my shoulders on the ground. And the final one with my arms as protracted as possible is just my shoulder blades and potentially my head keeping me from falling over. And that is obviously the most intense. So now that we know how to decrease the or narrow our base of support, now we need to record it. Because if you record it, then you can track it. If you can track it, you know if the patient or client is continuing to have really good technique in the exercise and you're tracking their base of support, you'll know if they're progressing with the same quality technique. So there's basically two ways you can do it. You can do it by simply measuring, basically from hand to hand, foot to foot, and there you go for the width of your base support for any standing exercise or prone exercise. And if you want to get a little more inventive and you want to plan ahead, you can also put tape down or put dots down that show the width of your base support. So you have basically standardized markings on the floor. So you can use the tape, or if you were to take this, and imagine if the suspension trainer for this last picture here is up here, then the widest dots could be where your feet can be the widest or hands can be the widest. The second and fourth set of dots can be where your feet are in between being together and being as wide as they possibly can. And the center dots can be where your feet are together or one foot is off the ground. And you're still aligned with a small glitch there. So now how do we measure the base support with a supine exercise? You can't go. You've already gone twice, so you can't go. Who else wants to give it a shot? How do I record the base of support and how I'm decreasing that base of support for a particular exercise that's in the supine position? Any guesses? Yes. Sure, go for it. Ooh. I like that. I like that. That was not going to be my solution for today. But what he said was, for those who didn't hear, is he offered the suggestion of measuring if your hands are completely on the ground, or your hands and arms are completely, measure from tip to tip. And then if you have your hands in, your elbow's still on the ground, you measure from elbow to elbow, shoulder to shoulder, or whatever's touching the ground. I like that. I like that. Yeah, you could have your hips on the ground, if that's what you mean by flat. Or, yeah, basically if your back is on the ground or almost on the ground, that would be supine. You're almost there. The hip, not the legs, but remember the legs are still in the heels. I mean, the heels of the legs are in the straps. There is a strap. Yes. That's why I asked you your legs. Oh yeah, not your legs in that point. No. All right. So a more shorthand way, from what you were saying, sir, was if your hips, arms, and shoulders on the ground, then you can write the letter H for hips, the capital A for arms, and SH for shoulders, saying what body parts were actually touching the ground. And then if it's just your arms and your shoulders, then you just put the A for arms and SH for shoulders. So you have ash, you have hash, and you have ash. If you just have your upper arms on the ground and the shoulders, then ush, as an usher. But I'm not as good of a dancer as him, I have to admit. And you would have that recording, and that is being blocked, but it would just be an SH for shoulders. So if you can record this saying his shoulders were 40 inches from the anchor point, and he had hash as far as his setup, then you know where he's setting up at. And then you can see as you write each term, as you go from week to week, you know he's progressing in handling these exercises with increased instability. And you don't have to increase the actual intensity of distance between you and the anchor. All right, so end summary. Suspension exercises are obviously very popular. There are factors, some that all we control to some degree. The first two, we only control when we're setting up for a particular exercise, and some we control within a set or within the workout if we need to adjust accordingly. And they're also effective in a number of ways per a number of scientific studies and academic texts. The studies that we highlighted suggest that they may also improve balance and instability. And there's only 3 groups that had all the criteria that I was looking for, so there's certainly more studies I think need to be done to verify some of this. And you can increase the instability by changing your base of support, either narrowing your base of support by your hands and feet, or how much your body is touching the floor per the initiation of each rep. And you can measure, record, and more importantly, track all these items, whether it's the distance or the base of support. So now you have a tracking mechanism for those particular exercises, which are sometimes tough to track as far as progress goes. You can have your progress notes and your daily notes as you work with your client from week to week or month to month. And you simply use measurements and markings to monitor that distance and width. So with that all being said, I really enjoyed being here and presenting to all you guys. Hope you enjoyed, and I'm happy for any questions. Any questions? I guess that's it. Well, I'm glad that happened. I'm glad that was very clear. All right. That's it. Thank you for having me again. And if you need me, I'll be at the table, and we can talk some more.